The boy was born in a small, quiet town where the streets smelled of wet earth after rain, and the sun seemed to linger longer. In the afternoons, he had been blind since birth, and life for him was different from other children. Sounds, textures, and smells were sharper, richer, and more alive. He could sense the wind change directions, hear the faintest rustle of leaves, and tell who was approaching by the sound of their steps. But music was where he truly found freedom from a very young age. The boy had been drawn to the piano. It was an old, slightly worn instrument that sat in a corner of the local community center. The keys were yellowed with age, and some had chipped edges, but when he touched them, he felt a world open up. He could hear the vibrations through the wood, the subtle differences between each note. While other children played with toys or ran through streets, he spent hours sitting at that piano, letting his fingers explore. Each sound carried a story, and he wanted to tell them all. His family had always tried to encourage his love for music. His mother, who worked long hours at a small shop, often found him at home tapping on a tiny keyboard she had managed to buy for him. She would listen quietly, letting him play, and sometimes hum along. His father would come home tired from work, but he would sit beside the boy on the floor and feel the vibrations as his fingers danced over the keys. They both knew that music had a way of giving him a voice that the world might otherwise ignore. One day, the town announced a local music recital. It was not a big event, just a small gathering in the community hall, but it was known to attract some serious talent. The boy was excited, but he also felt a knot in his stomach. He had never performed in front of strangers. Usually, he played only for himself or his family, but this time, he wanted to see what it felt like to share his music with others, even if it was just a small audience. He arrived early that afternoon, the faint smell of polish and old wood filling the hall. The chairs were arranged neatly, and a few parents sat talking quietly. The boy carefully walked to the edge of the stage, guided by his mother's hand. The piano stood there, tall and imposing, its surface shining under the dim lights. He could hear the other performers warming up, some tuning their instruments, some practicing scales over and over again. The sound was like a river, flowing and shifting, and he felt both nervous and inspired. Then, the moment came when he was supposed to meet the visiting pianist. This pianist was well known in the region, famous for his talent and strict teaching style. Many parents whispered about him, saying he had a sharp eye for talent and would not waste time on those he considered unworthy. The boy's mother gently led him toward the man. He could hear the pianist's shoes scuffing lightly against the wooden floor. He could hear the faint echo of his own heart beating faster than usual. "Hello," the boy said softly, unsure of what to say. He hoped for a kind word, some encouragement, even a small smile. He wanted to know if this pianist could help him learn more, help him improve. The pianist's gaze swept over the boy quickly. His expression was unreadable, sharp. He leaned back slightly, almost as if the boy's presence was an interruption. "Can you play?" he asked, not with curiosity, but with a hint of challenge. "Yes," the boy replied, a little too quickly, a little too eagerly. He wanted to show that he belonged here, that he had a right to be in the world of music just like anyone else. "Sit down, then," the pianist said, pointing toward the piano. His tone was cold, and there was a tension in the air that made the boy's stomach twist. He walked toward the piano and placed his fingers gently on the keys. For a moment, he hesitated, feeling the smooth, worn surface under his fingertips. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move, letting the music flow as he had practiced 1,000 times before. But the pianist did not watch closely. He tapped his fingers impatiently, frowning. After a minute, he stopped the boy abruptly. "No," he said simply. "You'll never be able to play. You're blind. You won't succeed." The words struck the boy like a sudden storm. For a moment, all sound seemed to stop. The music that had been flowing through him froze, and he could only hear the echo of those words inside his head. He wanted to cry, to scream, to argue, but nothing came out. His hands trembled slightly, and he felt tears welling up, even though he quickly blinked them away. "Excuse me," the boy managed to whisper, his voice shaking. "I said you'll never be able to play," the pianist repeated, his tone final. He did not explain, did not soften it, did not offer any guidance. He turned away, leaving the boy standing there in silence. The boy's mother gently guided him away, but she could see the pain in his eyes. He tried to hold himself together, but inside, he felt a storm of doubt. All the hours he had spent practicing, all the melodies he had imagined and played alone, suddenly seemed fragile. Could he really never succeed? Was the world going to be this unkind to him? That night, at home, the boy sat by his small keyboard. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. He pressed a key and listened. The sound felt the same as it always had, but now it carried a weight he had not felt before. He remembered the pianist's words over and over, like a shadow pressing down on him. He wanted to stop, to hide from the piano forever, but a tiny spark inside him refused to die. He remembered why he had loved music in the first place. He remembered how the vibrations of the piano made him feel alive, how melodies could carry him to places his eyes could never see. That spark, small but stubborn, whispered to him that maybe, just maybe, he could prove the world wrong. The next few days were difficult. He practiced less, lost in thought, questioning his abilities. Friends at school noticed that he seemed quieter, more withdrawn. Teachers who had once encouraged him did not know what to say. Even his parents felt a heavy sadness, unsure of how to help him rebuild his confidence. But late at night, when the house was silent and the world seemed far away, he would sit at the piano again. He would close his eyes, breathe in, and let his fingers find the keys naturally. Slowly, the music returned, tentative at first, then with more confidence. It was not easy. Some nights, he felt anger, frustration, and despair. He wanted to throw the piano out, to give up on dreams that now seemed impossible. But each time, he remembered the feeling of the first note he had ever played, the thrill of hearing a melody emerge from nothing, the joy of creating something beautiful entirely on his own. That memory became his anchor, holding him steady even when the storm of doubt raged around him. The boy started to discover ways to learn music without relying on sight. He began listening to recordings, letting his ears memorize each note, each pause, each nuance. He would hum along, tapping the rhythm on the table, feeling the beat in his body. He created his own system, his own methods. Because the world seemed determined to tell him that he could not succeed, he realized that if he wanted to keep music alive in his life, he would have to rely on himself, on his own determination, and on the love he had for every sound he could create. It was during one of these quiet nights that he felt the first taste of real determination. The boy realized that the pianist's words, harsh and cruel as they were, could not define him. They were just someone else's opinion, someone else's limit. They did not have to become his reality. He could choose to rise above them, to push himself further than anyone expected. That thought, small and fragile, was enough to make him sit straighter at the piano, to place his fingers on the keys with renewed purpose. The boy knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be people who doubted him, challenges he could not yet imagine, moments of failure that might feel unbearable. But he also knew something more important. He loved music more than he feared the world. That love was stronger than doubt, stronger than criticism, stronger than the blindness that shaped his life. It was a light that no one could extinguish, a fire that he would nurture with every note he played. And so, even though the first meeting with the famous pianist had ended in disappointment, the boy found a quiet, stubborn hope inside him. He would continue to play. He would continue to learn. He would continue to dream. Because music was not just about being seen or recognized. It was about expressing something deeper, something beautiful, something true. And he had no intention of letting anyone take that away from him. Night after night, he practiced in secret, each note a rebellion against the doubt that tried to bind him. The world might have said he could not, but the boy was beginning to understand something powerful. Sometimes, the greatest victories start in silence, in the heart, with a single person refusing to give up. And in that quiet determination, the boy felt something he had never felt before, a tiny, thrilling sense of possibility. Maybe one day, he would show the world that music does not care about sight or prejudice. Maybe one day, the very people who had doubted him would be amazed at what he could do. But for now, he would keep his music close, nurture it, and let it grow, knowing that the first step to anything extraordinary begins with believing in yourself, even when no one else does. After that day with the famous pianist, the boy felt a strange mix of emotions. The anger, the hurt, and the disappointment sat heavily in his chest. But beneath it all, something else had started to grow, a quiet, stubborn determination. He knew he could not let one person's words define him. If he wanted music in his life, if he wanted to play and express himself, he would have to find a way, no matter what anyone said. He returned home that evening and sat at his small keyboard in his bedroom. The soft hum of the city outside his window was comforting. He placed his fingers gently on the keys, and for a moment, he remembered the first time he had ever touched a piano. The excitement, the wonder, the thrill of creating sound from nothing. He took a deep breath and let his fingers move slowly, carefully, exploring the notes he already knew. At first, his playing was hesitant. The weight of the pianist's words lingered in his mind, and every note felt fragile, as if it could break under the slightest pressure. But soon, he began to notice something. Even though he could not see the piano, his fingers remembered. They knew where to go. The music was inside him, living in his memory and in his touch. He closed his eyes fully, letting himself listen. Each note was a small victory, proof that he could still create, still express, still play. The boy's family noticed the change. They saw him sitting at the piano for hours, not growing frustrated, not giving up. Even when mistakes happened, his mother would bring him a glass of water, or his father would sit nearby and hum along quietly. They said little, understanding that this was his private journey, something he needed to do on his own. They were proud, but more importantly, they were hopeful. School, however, remained a challenge. Some children did not understand his passion. They teased him sometimes, whispering cruel things when he walked by, or asking why he spent so much time with the piano instead of playing games with them. The boy felt the sting of their words, but he tried not to let them reach him. He reminded himself that the piano was not about them. It was about him, about the music inside him, about the world he could build with his own hands. To improve, he began to listen to music more intentionally. Recordings of famous pianists, orchestras, and solo performances became his teachers. He would close his eyes, focus on the sound, and tried to play what he heard. Sometimes he succeeded perfectly. Other times, the notes stumbled under his fingers. But each time, he learned something new. Each mistake became a step forward, a chance to understand music in a way that went beyond sight. He also discovered that rhythm and touch were just as important as the notes themselves. He would tap out rhythms on his desk, feeling the pulse in his hands and in his body. He would close his eyes and imagine the music flowing through him, guiding his fingers. Over time, he developed a unique style, shaped not by formal lessons, but by his own creativity and determination. He was learning to trust himself, and the results were quietly remarkable. At the community center, where the old piano sat, he began to spend more time. There were only a few people who came regularly, and they were curious but supportive. The boy would sit for hours, experimenting with melodies, improvising, and discovering sounds that surprised even him. Sometimes, someone would hear a note and stop to listen, smiling at the beauty in the sound. But mostly, he played alone, letting the piano become an extension of himself, a voice for emotions that words could not express. One afternoon, while practicing a particularly complicated piece, he felt a surge of excitement. He had listened to it on a recording countless times, and now his fingers moved with confidence. He could feel the rhythm, anticipate each note, and bring the music to life in his own way. The joy of that moment was overwhelming. It was not about showing anyone else. It was about proving to himself that he could do it, that he could rise above doubt and fear. The boy also started to write down the music in his own way. Since traditional sheet music was difficult for him to read, he created a tactile system. He would mark notes and rhythms on paper with raised dots, string together melodies in ways that made sense to him, and memorize them through touch and repetition. It was slow work and sometimes frustrating, but it allowed him to explore compositions he would never have been able to otherwise. He was creating his own language of music, one that belonged entirely to him. Friends in school began to notice his dedication. Some were curious and asked to hear him play. The boy was shy at first, unsure how others would react, but as he performed small pieces, the sound would fill the room, capturing their attention. They began to understand that he was different, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him special. Slowly, some of them started to respect him, to see his talent, even if they could not fully understand it. His family remained his greatest support. His mother, seeing his commitment, started saving up to buy him better recordings and some small materials for learning music by touch. His father, though tired from work, would sometimes sit beside him at the piano, keeping time, or listening intently to his latest improvisation. They did not tell him he was talented. Instead, they let him discover it himself, guiding him gently when needed, offering encouragement without pressure. That approach allowed the boy to grow in confidence without feeling forced or judged. One evening, while practicing late into the night, the boy felt a shift inside him. He realized that the music he played was no longer just notes and rhythms. It was a reflection of his own emotions, his struggles, and his joys. The frustration he had felt after the pianist's cruel words, the isolation he experienced at school, the small victories he achieved alone, all of it flowed through his fingers. He felt a sense of liberation, a sense that music could carry what words could not. The community center began to notice his presence. Occasionally, older musicians would pass by and hear the boy playing. They were curious, sometimes impressed, sometimes surprised. No one could see his fingers move, but the sound told the story. A young blind boy, passionate and determined, creating music that resonated beyond the small room. Some whispered that his talent was rare. Others simply smiled, happy to witness someone so dedicated. Despite the small victories, the boy still faced moments of doubt. Some nights, he would sit at the piano and feel hopeless. Why was it so difficult? Why did the world seem so determined to make him feel small? But each time, he reminded himself of the first moment he felt music under his fingers. The thrill of creating sound from nothing. The joy that had never left him. That joy was a compass, guiding him back to persistence. Over time, he began to see patterns in music. He could hear a song once and almost immediately understand its structure, its flow. He could anticipate changes, harmonies, and even the subtle shifts in emotion that the composer intended. This ability, born out of careful listening and practice, gave him confidence. He realized that his blindness, while a challenge, had sharpened his other senses in a way that gave him an edge few could understand. Music became not just a passion, but a world in which he could excel. One day, while experimenting with a new melody, he felt a thrill of creativity unlike anything before. He had combined different pieces he had learned, twisting and reshaping them, making something entirely new. It was not perfect, but it was alive. He realized that his journey was not just about proving others wrong. It was about discovering what he could do, what music could become in his hands. That realization filled him with pride and a quiet excitement for the future. His determination did not go unnoticed by everyone. A retired music teacher, who had once taught many talented students, happened to hear about the boy through the community center. Curious, the teacher visited and listened to him play. What she heard amazed her. The boy's technical skill, creativity, and emotional depth were beyond what she expected from someone so young. And without formal instruction, she knew immediately that he had extraordinary potential. The teacher approached the boy gently, speaking softly so as not to startle him. She offered guidance, asking if he would like to learn more, to refine his skills, to explore music in ways he had never imagined. The boy hesitated, remembering the cruel words of the famous pianist. But something in the teacher's tone felt different. It was supportive, encouraging, patient. He nodded slowly, realizing that this could be the chance he had been waiting for. With this mentorship, the boy's progress accelerated. The teacher taught him new techniques, ways to read music by touch, and methods to refine his rhythm and expression. The boy soaked up every lesson, practicing diligently and experimenting with what he had learned. The piano became a place of endless discovery, a space where challenges became opportunities, and where determination transformed into skill. The boy's secret determination had begun to bear fruit. He was no longer playing just for himself. He was learning to express emotions, tell stories through music, and touch the hearts of those who listened. And even though the road ahead remained uncertain, he felt a growing sense of hope. The music inside him was alive, and nothing, not the doubt of others, not the challenges he faced, not even his blindness could stop it from shining. With the help of his new teacher, the boy's world of music began to expand in ways he had never imagined. The teacher was patient and observant, carefully guiding his fingers, helping him understand rhythms, scales, and techniques that were challenging but not impossible. She never treated him like someone fragile or incapable. Instead, she saw potential, and that belief began to shape the boy's confidence in ways the words of the famous pianist never could. Every afternoon, he would arrive at her small music studio. The smell of polished wood and old books filled the air, comforting and familiar. He would run his fingers over the keys, feeling the vibrations of each note, letting the music flow naturally. Sometimes he would stumble over a difficult passage, and the teacher would gently guide his hands, showing him a new way to approach the sound. At first, he was hesitant, afraid of making mistakes, but gradually, he began to trust himself and his abilities more than ever before. The teacher introduced him to new music, pieces that were more complex than anything he had attempted before. She encouraged him to play not just by following instructions, but by listening deeply, by letting the music speak to him and through him. At first, it was frustrating. He could hear the melodies clearly in his mind, but translating them to the piano required patience, precision, and practice. Many nights, he would leave the studio exhausted, but each time, he felt a growing sense of accomplishment. The boy began to notice subtle changes in himself. He could feel rhythms more deeply, anticipate melodies, and even experiment with harmonies that surprised him. Music was no longer just something he played. It had become a way of understanding the world, expressing what he could not say with words. He discovered that even mistakes could be beautiful if approached with intention. Each note, each pause, each gentle touch on the keys told a story, a reflection of his own emotions and imagination. Encouraged by his teacher, the boy began performing in small, informal settings. The first performance was at the community center, where only a few people gathered. His mother and father sat in the front row, smiling with quiet pride. The audience was small, but the boy did not notice. He closed his eyes, let his fingers find the keys, and allowed the music to flow freely. The sound filled the room, and even though most of the audience could not see him, they felt the emotion in every note. Word of his talent began to spread slowly. People who had heard him play at the community center told friends, and soon, others began to take notice. Local musicians and teachers were intrigued by a blind boy who played with such skill, passion, and depth. Some were skeptical at first, thinking perhaps the talent was exaggerated, but those who listened closely could not deny it. The boy's music had a life of its own, something rare and extraordinary that drew people in and refused to let them go. He began to receive invitations to play at local events and gatherings. Some were simple occasions, like school functions or neighborhood celebrations, while others were slightly more formal, with small stages and microphones. Each time, the boy felt nervous, but the excitement always overcame his fear. He discovered that performing in front of others did not diminish the music. Instead, it made it more alive. The energy of the audience, their quiet attention, and the soft applause after each piece gave him a sense of connection that he had never experienced before. The teacher was always there, supporting him quietly from the side. She would nod when he played well, offer small corrections when needed, and most importantly, remind him that music was not about pleasing others, it was about expressing himself. That guidance helped him grow. He learned to play with intention, to consider the emotions behind each piece, and to communicate through sound rather than relying on sight or applause. One day, a small regional music competition was announced. It was not a huge event, but it was known for attracting talented performers from nearby towns. The boy's teacher suggested he enter. At first, he was hesitant. Competitions were intimidating. What if he failed? What if the other musicians were better? The fear that had once paralyzed him after the famous pianist's words returned briefly. But then he remembered how far he had come, the hours of practice, the melodies he could now play with ease and emotion. Slowly, he began to feel a spark of courage. With his teacher's guidance, he prepared for the competition. They worked on a piece that was challenging, but allowed him to showcase both technical skill and emotional depth. They practiced every day, sometimes late into the evening, carefully refining each passage, each rhythm, each note. The boy learned to anticipate the changes, to feel the music in his hands, and to let it flow naturally. The preparation was demanding, but it also filled him with a sense of purpose and excitement he had never known before. The day of the competition arrived. The boy felt a mixture of nerves and determination. The hall was larger than the community center, and the audience was unfamiliar. He could hear the whispers of other competitors, the shuffle of papers, the soft tuning of instruments. But he focused on the piano, placing his hands on the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness, and letting his mind empty of fear. He closed his eyes and began to play. The first notes were soft and tentative, but as the piece progressed, the boy's confidence grew. The music filled the hall, carrying emotion and precision, creating a story that the audience could feel even without seeing him. People leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The boy played with focus, with joy, and with the knowledge that he was doing something extraordinary, not because others expected it, but because he had worked for it, dreamed of it, and believed in himself. When he finished, there was a pause, a moment of quiet that seemed to stretch forever. Then, the audience erupted in applause. Some people stood, clapping with genuine admiration. The boy opened his eyes, feeling a wave of pride and relief. He had done it, not just for the competition, but for himself. He had proved that the music inside him was real, that it could touch others, and that he could overcome the doubt and fear that had once threatened to stop him. Among the audience was a familiar figure, the same pianist who had told him he would never be able to play. He had come quietly, curious to see what this young boy could do. When he heard the performance, he froze. The music was flawless, expressive, and full of emotion. He had underestimated the boy, dismissed him without knowing his true potential, and now he realized how wrong he had been. The boy's talent was undeniable, and the performance left the entire hall in awe. After the competition, the pianist approached the boy. There was a long moment of silence as they faced each other. The boy was nervous, unsure what the pianist would say. But then, in a tone that was softer and more respectful than before, the pianist said, "I did not expect this. You have talent beyond measure. Keep playing. Keep learning." The boy nodded quietly, accepting the words but not letting them define him. He knew his journey was his own, and the recognition, while welcome, was not the reason he played. From that day on, the boy began to perform more frequently in public. Local newspapers and small media outlets took notice. Articles described a young blind boy whose talent had astonished everyone. People came from neighboring towns to hear him play. Some were musicians themselves, curious to understand how someone could achieve such skill without sight. Others were simply lovers of music, drawn to the emotion and depth in every note. The boy never let the attention change him. He remained humble, focused, and passionate. Every performance was an opportunity to share his music, to express what he felt, and to connect with others. He learned to enjoy the moments on stage, to listen to the audience, and to allow the music to flow naturally. Each time he played, he discovered something new, a subtle emotion, a hidden note, or a way to shape the sound in a way that surprised even him. His teacher continued to guide him, helping him refine his technique and explore new musical styles. She introduced him to compositions he had never imagined, pieces that challenged him to grow, to stretch his understanding, and to develop his own voice. The boy embraced every challenge, knowing that each step forward brought him closer to his dream. The boy also began to inspire others. Children who had never played music before watched him with awe. Adults who had given up on their own musical dreams saw him and remembered their own passions. The community began to see him not just as a talented musician, but as a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the power of belief in oneself. His story spread quietly at first, but the impact was profound. Even with all the attention and recognition, the boy remained focused on his music. He knew that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, practice, and love for the art were what truly mattered. Every day, he returned to the piano with the same curiosity and excitement he had felt as a child. He experimented with melodies, explored new harmonies, and allowed the music to guide him in ways that felt natural and true. By the end of this period, the boy had grown in confidence and skill beyond what anyone in his town could have imagined. He had faced doubt, rejection, and the harsh words of someone who failed to see his potential. Yet through determination, practice, and the guidance of a mentor who believed in him, he had emerged stronger, more skilled, and more connected to the music than ever before. He understood something vital now. Talent could open doors, but determination and love for what one does could create paths that no one else could imagine. The music inside him had become a part of who he was, a source of strength, and a voice that could speak even when words failed. And though the journey was far from over, the boy felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that his music would continue to astonish and inspire those who listened. After his first big performance at the regional competition, the boy's life began to change slowly but unmistakably. People in the town started recognizing him on the street, often stopping to ask when he would perform next. Local music shops and small newspapers began to share stories of the blind boy, whose talent seemed to surpass even those with years of formal training. Each recognition brought a mixture of pride and humility. He knew that none of this could have happened without his dedication and the guidance of his teacher. Word spread beyond his town. One day, his teacher received a phone call from a music festival in a nearby city. The festival was small, but had a reputation for highlighting talented young musicians. They had heard of the boy's performance at the competition and wanted him to play. The teacher looked at him with a quiet excitement in her eyes and asked if he wanted to participate. At first, he felt a surge of nervousness. This would be a much bigger stage, with an unfamiliar audience and musicians far more experienced than he was. But after a moment, he felt the same spark of courage that had carried him through practice and small performances. He nodded. Preparation for the festival began immediately. The teacher helped him choose pieces that would show both technical skill and emotional depth. They worked day and night, refining each note, adjusting rhythms, and shaping the music to be expressive yet precise. The boy spent hours memorizing melodies, internalizing every pause and accent. Unlike before, this preparation was not just about practice. It was about telling a story through music, making the audience feel what he felt when playing. When the day of the festival arrived, the boy felt a familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety. The hall was large, with bright lights, rows of chairs stretching far back, and a hum of voices from an audience eager to hear the performers. He could hear the steps of other musicians, the tuning of instruments, and the occasional laughter from the crowd. He focused on the sound of the piano, on the feel of the keys beneath his fingers, and on the music in his mind. As he stepped onto the stage, he felt the energy of the audience pressing in. His hands hovered above the keys, and he took a deep breath. Closing his eyes, he began to play. The first notes were soft, tentative, like a whisper. But as he continued, the music grew stronger, more confident. The melodies flowed with ease, the harmonies deepened, and the emotion carried through every note. The audience fell silent, listening intently. The boy was no longer just performing. He was telling a story, speaking without words, letting the music convey every feeling he had ever experienced. People in the audience were astonished. Many had never heard someone play with such depth, passion, and precision, especially someone who could not see the piano. Some leaned forward in their seats, completely absorbed in the sound. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling the boy's emotions in a way words could never express. When he finished, there was a long pause, as if the hall itself was holding its breath, and then an eruption of applause. The boy opened his eyes, hearing the cheers, the clapping, the admiration, and felt a wave of pride and relief wash over him. Among the audience was a critic from a well-known music magazine. He had attended many festivals, heard countless young musicians, but he was completely captivated by the boy's performance. After the show, he sought him out to write about his talent. The boy felt nervous but also proud. This was another step, not for recognition alone, but for sharing the music that had become the center of his life. The boy's story began to appear in local and regional newspapers. Articles described the blind boy whose talent astonished even seasoned musicians. They spoke of his determination, his unique approach to learning music, and the emotional depth he brought to every performance. People from other towns began traveling to hear him play. Some were aspiring musicians, curious to see how he achieved such skill. Others were simply lovers of music, drawn to the story of perseverance and triumph. Despite all the attention, the boy remained humble. He knew that talent alone was not enough. It was the hours of practice, the guidance of his teacher, and the love he had for music that made him what he was. Each new performance was an opportunity to grow, to connect with others, and to express what he felt inside. He focused on the music, not on the applause, and this sincerity shone through every note he played. As he continued performing, the boy began to receive invitations to larger venues. Schools, community centers, and music clubs asked him to play, and he gladly accepted. Each new stage brought its own challenges, unfamiliar spaces, different pianos, new audiences. But he adapted. He learned to feel the piano keys, to sense the acoustics of each hall, and to let the music guide him naturally. Every performance strengthened his confidence and skill. The boy's teacher continued to mentor him, encouraging him to explore new styles and techniques. They studied classical compositions, jazz improvisations, and contemporary pieces. The boy began to blend these influences into his own style, creating music that was uniquely his. He experimented with rhythm, melody, and harmony, discovering combinations that surprised even him. His creativity flourished, and each performance became an expression of both technical mastery and personal emotion. During this time, the boy also began teaching other children informally. Some were visually impaired, others simply curious about music. He shared his approach to learning by ear and touch, demonstrating that music could be accessible to anyone willing to dedicate time and effort. Watching the children learn from him brought a new sense of joy. He realized that music was not just about performing. It was about inspiring others, sharing knowledge, and helping others find their own voice. One afternoon, while preparing for another performance, the boy received an unexpected visitor, the pianist who had once told him he would never be able to play. The man had heard of the boy's growing reputation and wanted to see for himself. At first, the boy felt a mix of fear and curiosity. He remembered the harsh words, the doubt, and the dismissal. But he also realized how far he had come, how much he had grown, and how much he had achieved. He welcomed the pianist quietly. The pianist listened as the boy played a complex, emotionally rich piece. His hands moved with confidence and grace, each note precise, each pause meaningful. The music filled the room, carrying the boy's emotions and story. The pianist's expression changed gradually from curiosity to astonishment to admiration. He had underestimated the boy completely, and now he saw talent, determination, and artistry that he could not deny. When the performance ended, the pianist spoke softly, with a tone of respect and humility. "I was wrong," he said simply. "You have extraordinary talent. Keep playing, and never stop." The boy nodded, feeling a mixture of vindication and quiet satisfaction. He did not need this acknowledgement to validate himself, but it was a moment of closure, a recognition that his journey was real, and that he had proved not only to the world, but to himself that he was capable. The boy's story continued to spread. Local television stations invited him for interviews. Music blogs wrote about him, and more communities wanted him to perform. Each opportunity was another chance to share his music and inspire others. People who had never imagined a blind child could play with such skill now watched in awe, and many began to question their own assumptions about talent, ability, and determination. Through all of this, the boy remained grounded. He continued practicing daily, exploring new compositions, and pushing the boundaries of what he could achieve. Each performance, each note, each piece he learned or created was a step forward, a new chapter in his journey. The music had become more than a passion. It was a part of who he was, a voice that spoke even when words could not, a way to connect with the world around him. The boy also began to dream bigger. He imagined performing in larger cities, in concert halls, even internationally. He thought about collaborating with other musicians, learning from them, and sharing his own style. These dreams were not just about fame or recognition, they were about reaching more people, touching more hearts, and showing that determination, talent, and love for what you do could overcome any obstacle. Even as he pursued these dreams, the boy never forgot where he had started: the small keyboard at home, the old piano at the community center, the hours spent learning by ear, and the first cruel words of the pianist who had doubted him. Those memories were not bitter. They were reminders of how far he had come and why he worked so hard. They were proof that persistence and love for music could transform even the harshest obstacles into fuel for growth. By the end of this period, the boy had not only achieved recognition, but had also inspired a small movement of young musicians in his town. Children who once believed music was out of reach now approached the piano with curiosity and excitement. Teachers began to rethink how they approached students with disabilities, realizing that talent could flourish with encouragement, patience, and opportunity. And through it all, the boy remained focused on the music, on creating, expressing, and sharing. He had reached a point where the world began to take notice. But the most important growth had happened inside him. Confidence, skill, creativity, and resilience had blossomed through years of practice, struggle, and mentorship. He understood that recognition was fleeting, but the ability to touch hearts with music, to inspire and uplift others, was something lasting and profound. And he knew that his journey was far from over. The boy's life had changed in ways he could not have imagined. From the despair and doubt after the words of the famous pianist, he had grown into a young musician whose talent was undeniable, whose determination was unwavering, and whose music carried the power to move and inspire. The boy had learned that obstacles were not the end, they were opportunities to discover strength, courage, and the extraordinary potential that lay within. And as he looked toward the future, the boy felt a quiet certainty. He would continue to play, to grow, to perform, and to inspire. The music inside him was alive, vibrant, and unstoppable. The world could doubt him, the road could be challenging, but his love for music and his determination to follow his path would carry him forward. And through his journey, he would show everyone, not just with words, but with every note, that true passion and perseverance could create wonders beyond imagination. As the boy continued to perform and grow, his story began to reach far beyond his town. Videos of his performances were shared online, slowly at first, then more widely as people were drawn to the emotion, skill, and determination that flowed from his music. Each performance touched hearts, and more people began to notice not just the talent of a blind boy, but the courage and persistence behind every note. He was invited to perform in larger cities, where concert halls were bigger, the audiences more diverse, and the expectations higher. At first, he felt nervous, remembering the words of the pianist who had once told him he would never play. But those words now felt distant, almost powerless. He had worked too hard, come too far, and discovered too much within himself to be stopped by doubt. The music had become stronger than fear, and he trusted in it completely. At one such concert, the hall was packed. The boy could hear the quiet chatter of people settling in, the rustle of programs, and the occasional cough. He could feel the stage under his feet and the keys beneath his fingers. He closed his eyes and began to play. The music began softly, a whisper that invited the audience to lean in and listen. Then it grew, stronger and richer, carrying a story of struggle, hope, and triumph. Every note resonated through the room, and every pause held weight and meaning. People were moved. Some wept quietly, touched by the emotion of the performance. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to believe the depth and skill coming from a young blind boy. The music spoke in ways words never could, bridging gaps of experience, age, and background. By the time the final note faded, the applause was thunderous. Standing ovations filled the hall, and the boy felt a wave of emotion that was almost overwhelming. After the concert, the boy met other musicians, some famous, some aspiring. They were curious, respectful, and eager to learn from him, just as he had learned from his teacher. Collaborations began, small at first, then larger, each one a chance to explore new sounds, styles, and emotions. He discovered that music was not just a personal journey, it was a shared experience, a language that connected people in ways nothing else could. His story began to appear in national news, online articles, and music magazines. Reporters wrote about the boy's determination, his early struggles, and the way he had transformed doubt into opportunity. He was praised not just for his technical skill, but for the inspiration he offered to countless others who had been told they could not achieve their dreams. People who had never touched a piano or considered music as part of their lives were now watching, listening, and believing in the power of persistence and passion. Even with this growing recognition, the boy remained focused on his music. He practiced daily, always seeking to improve, to discover new ways to express emotion, and to push the boundaries of his ability. Fame was not his goal. It was a byproduct of his dedication and love for what he did. Each performance, whether in front of a small group or a large hall, was an opportunity to connect, to inspire, and to create something lasting. He began to think about other children like him, those with disabilities, or those who had been discouraged from pursuing their dreams. He wanted to show them that limitations could be challenged, that talent was not defined by circumstance, and that with determination, anything was possible. He started workshops and small lessons, teaching by ear, by touch, and by example. Watching the children play, seeing their excitement and pride, filled him with a joy that rivaled any audience applause. One day, a major international music organization invited him to perform at a global festival. This was a stage far larger than anything he had experienced, with renowned musicians and critics from around the world. The boy felt nervous, of course, but he also felt ready. Years of practice, struggle, and small victories had prepared him for this moment. He had learned that confidence came not from what others thought, but from knowing one's own abilities and trusting in them. When he arrived at the festival, the halls were grand, the pianos immaculate, and the audience vast. He could hear murmurs of curiosity and anticipation. Many had read about him online or in articles. Some were skeptical, some were excited, but he focused on the piano, closing his eyes, letting the keys and the music guide him. As soon as he began, the room fell silent. The sound was rich, full of emotion, and carried a depth that surprised everyone. He played with technical mastery, creativity, and, most importantly, heart. Critics later described the performance as breathtaking. Musicians marveled at his technique, his interpretation, and the unique voice he had developed. They could not believe the level of artistry coming from someone who had learned without sight and had faced so many obstacles. The boy had not only conquered his own doubts, but had astonished the entire music world, proving that talent combined with determination could achieve the extraordinary. The performance sparked invitations to international stages, interviews, and collaborations. Musicians from different countries wanted to work with him. Composers wanted him to perform their pieces, and organizations wanted him to inspire and teach. He traveled, performing in concert halls that were once unimaginable, reaching audiences that spanned the globe. Yet despite the growing fame, he remained grounded. He remembered his small keyboard at home, the old piano at the community center, and the hours of quiet practice that had shaped him. Those memories were his anchor, keeping him humble and focused. He also made time to return to his town, performing in schools and local events, sharing his journey with the children who had first inspired him. He spoke to them about persistence, passion, and belief in oneself. He demonstrated that challenges could be transformed into opportunities, and that the love for one's craft could overcome even the harshest doubts. Watching the children play, seeing the excitement and pride in their eyes, reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. Over time, he became more than a performer. He became a symbol of hope and possibility. People who had been told they could not achieve their dreams saw him and felt inspired. Musicians, teachers, parents, and children alike recognized that talent was not the only ingredient for success. Determination, resilience, and a willingness to learn were just as vital. His story showed the world that barriers, no matter how imposing, could be overcome with courage and dedication. The boy also faced moments of reflection. He remembered the first time he met the pianist who had doubted him. The memory of those words, harsh, dismissive, and cruel, once felt like a weight he could never lift. But now, he understood that those words had been transformed. They had fueled his determination, taught him resilience, and strengthened his love for music. When he thought about them, he no longer felt hurt or anger, only a quiet sense of triumph. He had proved that belief in oneself was stronger than the doubts of others. In an unexpected turn, the same pianist sought him out publicly during one of his performances in a major city. The audience watched as the man approached him after the concert, this time with respect and humility. "I was wrong," he said quietly, almost reverently. "You have shown the world what true talent and determination mean. I apologize for doubting you." The boy nodded, feeling a sense of closure. He had not needed this acknowledgement to validate his journey, but it was a reminder of how far he had come and how much he had achieved. As his career continued to grow, the boy also focused on mentoring others. He worked with blind and visually impaired children, teaching them to play by ear, to feel the music, and to trust their own abilities. He traveled to schools, community centers, and workshops, sharing techniques and inspiration. Many children who had once believed that music was out of reach now discovered their own voices. Guided by his example and encouragement, his performances became legendary. Audiences described not just the technical brilliance, but the